Let's start with Chris Eubank Jr., the champion here. There's a few options on the table for him. What Chris Eubank Jr. we've always discussed about him was saying, hey, there's been so many opportunities for you to go pursue world championships. Why not go pursue them? And there's always been question debate around this for Chris Eubank Jr. However, what I would say I've realized in this situation is that, listen, there could be a big payday again, and if he does a rematch with Conor Benn. That is clearly on the table. Both promoters, everyone involved is already discussing that this is very, very likely for September, a rematch. But if we're looking at it from Chris Eubank Jr.'s standpoint, he has a win against Conor Benn. It is what it is. What you could do is obviously do the rematch, but here's a couple of the options I came up with. I think one that we could very likely see, and I don't think it's going to be a very competitive fight, but I think we could potentially see a Canelo Alvarez versus Chris Eubank Jr. fight. Now, am I very, very big on that fight? Not necessarily. What I'm talking about here is that, listen, we know Canelo Alvarez on the back end of his career. He already has his fight upcoming this weekend on Saturday, booked, obviously William Skull. Then he goes out and is likely fighting Bud Crawford in September. He's not going to fight again, most likely, until this weekend next year on Cinco de Mayo weekend in May. That would be the target date I'd look at. And why do I think that would be possible? Well, Chris Eubank Jr. can obviously fight at 160 or move up to 168. He's pretty much able to do either weight class there. If you're going up to 168, there's no one really that big of a platform and a brand than Canelo. And the branding and the image, the loving that Chris Eubank Jr. currently has, does put him in position to have a mega fight with Canelo Alvarez. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying that this makes the most sense because at 168, with as big as Chris Eubank Jr. is right now, I mean, there are big names, sure. Caleb Plant's a solid name. Edgar Berlanga, sure. But none of those fights make sense for him. They're not for a world championship. Canelo's going to have all the belts come Saturday, in my opinion. I don't think William Skull's getting them. If William Skull does, then we'll see what happens. But I think Canelo Alvarez is going to have all the belts there. If we go to 160, then you do have other options. You have one of the champions there. Adames is obviously a solid champion. You have Janabek and you have Laura. Do any of those fights make sense to me, or does he even want to stay at 160? That's to be determined. And I do think we also will have a Janabek versus Adames unification fight coming up soon. I know that's been in the speculation rumor, so we'll see what happens there. But that could make for a huge fight there. Chris Eubank Jr. going up against the guy that wins the unification that has 3 belts between Janabek or Adames. That would be on the table. I'll list one more option that, once again, I did mention these two guys' names, but there's going to be a fight July 12th in New York City. It's a headlining event. While it's controversial as to whether or not they should be headlining, Edgar Berlanga versus Hamza Shiraz. I just said I'm not a massive fan of the Edgar Berlanga fight, but when we talk about Edgar Berlanga and Hamza Shiraz, the winner of that fight will have a much more significant branding and name and image behind them. That could potentially make sense. I'm not a big fan of that fight, to be honest with you guys. However, I could see that being on the table because of the fact that there are obviously Turkey ties here between Chris Eubank Jr. and his promotions and everything along that there. And we do know how much Turkey specifically loves Hamza Shiraz. Could that be the fight that gets put together? I personally don't really want to see that fight, but I could see it happen. I think the most likely option is that the 3 things I'd say for Chris Eubank Jr. is you have a championship fight with whoever unifies between Adames and Janabek. If that fight comes to fruition, you have the rematch with Conor Benn, or you go and fight Canelo Alvarez for undisputed. Probably going to be roughly around May of next year, unless there's another day that Canelo is going to fight at. That's what I've got for Chris Eubank Jr. Let's go to Conor Benn now. He has a lot more options on the table, one of which is the rematch. And I'll just put this out there. There's a lot of controversy, a lot of debate. Should the rematch happen? I know Chris Eubank Sr. is not a big fan of this whole thing going on. He's telling the media to call this out and so on and so forth. And I see his point. Weight classes do matter. But we can't deny the fact that Conor Benn did show up and perform very, very well in that fight. My thing about the rematch is, does a rematch make sense for Conor Benn? Will he be able to perform any better than he did Saturday? Possibly. I mean, I'm never going to doubt somebody, but at the same time, Conor Benn probably had the best performance he could possibly have against Chris Eubank Jr. And as long as they'd have to have all the rematch, rehydration clauses, everything still in place for it to even make sense again. So is the rematch possible? Sure. Would I be against it? Absolutely not. And in fact, just put out the facts right now, Turki Al-Sheikh has already said this. He is hoping to stage a Chris Eubank Jr. Conor Benn rematch in September back at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. We'll see what happens. That is obviously on the table. We could see it. Eubank and Benn have already agreed to terms and are contracted for a rematch as they sign for a 2-fight deal. So is the rematch possible for this fight? Absolutely. And am I against it? No. However, is that what makes the most sense for both guys? I don't think so. I think that when you look at the potential opportunities for these guys in terms of Chris Eubank Jr. becoming a world champion at a weight class that makes more sense for him, that would be huge for himself. As for Conor Benn, there are a lot more options on the table. Let me break them down for you. He goes back down to 147. It might be tough for him to make 147. We'll see if he can do it or not. But listen, 147, you have a guy, Mario Barrios. I know there's rumors of a Manny Pacquiao fight now coming together. They've been agreed to. I hope to God that did not happen. I've already given my thoughts on that disgrace. But Mario Barrios is an option on the table for yourself. Jerome Boots Ennis, that would be huge. And Brian Norman Jr. Now, Brian Norman Jr. is obviously having his fight in June, if I'm not mistaken, against Jin Sasaki. So that belt could be up in the balance. But also, let me say this. If you look at 147, we know some other names coming up too. In fact, a few of those guys who will be fighting this upcoming weekend. Ron Garcia, Devin Haney, potentially even Teofimo Lopez. All are guys that have had the names flooded with potentially moving up to 147. Those would all be massive fights. And I think for Conor Benn, you talk about Conor Benn versus any of those guys I just listed, we're looking at a pretty big fight there. So a lot of options on the table at 147 if he can make that weight cut. Moving up to 154. That is a division that I think is the most deep, talented weight class in boxing right now. You can debate that with a couple others. Light heavyweights certainly up there, so on and so forth. But when we talk about 154, there are some boys there. Let's look at some of the guys. Bud Crawford is the big name. I don't think that fight's going to come to fruition. My personal opinion, Bud Crawford is fighting Canelo in September. If there's a rematch clause involved there, we might see that. If not, it would not shock me if Bud Crawford walks away from boxing at that point in time. I don't see a Bud Crawford fight happening there. I also do not even know if Bud Crawford will fight at 154 ever again. So that belt could become vacant. And if it becomes vacant, here's a fight I could propose for people. You could have Conor Benn face Virgil Ortiz Jr. I think everybody believes that Virgil Ortiz Jr. is the best guy at 154 that is not a champion currently. That would be a mega fight to have happen. Whether that be in the United States or you have them in the UK, that's a massive fight to make. Let's swing over to other options now. 154, Sebastian Fundora is available there. That could be an interesting fight. Or Bakram Mursavaliev. As for Bakram, I think he is a dangerous fighter. And I don't know if that's the type of fight that makes sense for Conor Benn to come right to 154 and fight against a guy like that. However, that is on the table. And then the final option for Conor Benn is a rematch. We already discussed that. Does it make sense? Sure. Financially, he's going to make a massive bag again. Is it already kind of in place? Yes. But once again, like what Eddie Hearn said, do you want to put Conor Benn in a situation where he's going to go up there and fight a guy 2 weight classes bigger than him and try to combat a guy like that, taking on the damage, taking all those different things going to happen to him? That's a question that they need to decide upon. Conor Benn's already working out. He posted a video this morning talking about getting back on the treadmill, working out, staying in shape, getting ready. I personally think that's what he's going to want. I think there's a lot of money in that fight, but I'm just saying you have to be smart about your career. Does it make more sense to go pursue a world championship at 147 or 154 and save your body some? Or do you just want to cash out, get the Chris Eubank Jr. fight, and see where you go from there? They have to decide that. That's just my opinions on those things.